we kind of rejiggered this thing a little bit. We've learned that Zoom is attuned to the human voice, but it is not attuned to musical instruments, which is why sometimes when musical instruments are being played over Zoom, there's that delay. We might have noticed that like in some of our church services and things. It's there's all these filters in there to prevent feedback anyway, so we've got it kind of rejiggered. So hopefully the sound quality will be good. At the end, um, I think we'd really love to hear any questions you may have. And so we'll get off of this thing so we'll be able to hear you, but right now we can't. And something just went wrong with the screen here. I can't see. Or is that just?
No, it's
just okay. Okay, so well, good evening, everyone. Pastor asked that we think about doing some family music for you this evening, and in order to shake it up a little bit, we usually are doing an instrumental with a piano accompaniment. We decided tonight to just give you a little bit of glimpse into the instruments that Allegra and Ethan play. Both of them are very accomplished musicians and have been in orchestras since they were very little, and including it at their college. Ethan is going to be going back, and I'm going to brag on him just a little bit. He's going to be receiving a minor in music, and his department is so impressed with him that they are actually writing a piece for him to perform in the spring semester. He's been a real leader at his college, and so I'm very proud of him. He graduates this spring. So Ethan plays the French horn, Allegra plays the violin. They're very interesting instruments. It's very different from the piano, where you strike a key and the sound is always middle C. With Ethan, the mouthpiece is involved, as well as the air going through and the valves. Allegra, of course, moves the bow across the string, and I think you'll get a kick out of hearing what they have to tell you and hearing some of the music that they play for you this evening. So, without further ado, here's Ethan.
All right, good evening, everybody. So, this is my horn. I've been playing with it for the past 11 years. And, you know, it's kind of an instrument that I fell in love with the first time I played it, but it wasn't until, 2 years that I was really able to fully understand, everything that there was going on with it. I played the violin, and after that I played the piano before I played the French horn, and when I started playing this instrument, I was kind of shocked by all of the different ways you can control the sound and all of the ways you can adjust the pitch. There are no less than 3 different ways that you can actually change notes on a French horn. Like my mom said, with the piano, you just strike a key, and that'll be your note. But on a French horn, you can adjust the notes by adjusting your lip position, your embouchure. You can adjust it with your keys, and finally, you can actually adjust it by moving your hand in the bell, and that's unique among brass instruments. So this first method of kind of changing your sound is common for all brass instruments. Now, of course, a French horn has a much tinier embouchure, and when I say embouchure, I mean the way you sort of pucker your lips up to, make that little buzzing sound, this little that ultimately gets transformed into beautiful music, like. Right? So, and this little buzzing actually has to pass through anywhere between 12 to 24 feet of tubing. In this case, it's about 18 feet. This is a double horn, and I'll talk a little bit more about that as the night goes on. But the main sort of purpose of just using your lips, or the main sort of kind of technique that you can use your lips for, is adjusting overtones, like this. That's an arpeggio. On the French horn, every arpeggio can be basically played with one finger combination and just a couple of different embouchure adjustments. You can also do this thing called lip trills. practicing those. That's something that's a little new to me. But that's kind of what you can do with your lips. And once again, that's true of all brass instruments. Now, the French horn is a little more unique in the way its valves work. You've got, it's pretty much like a trumpet or a tuba in which you have 3 different valves. But unlike a trumpet and most tubas, you have a lever-based valve system instead of a button-based valve system. Now, the French horn, like I said, it has only 3 valve combinations. And this means that you sort of have to do more with less in terms of figuring out kind of what notes have various valve combinations. If you were to look on a French horn sort of worksheet that you use when you're first starting out, you'll see that a single note can have 3 or 4 different valve combinations. Now, valve combinations are sort of the bread and butter of playing any French horn piece. Typically, it's how you sort of get in between those big, broad overtones and play chromatic things like this, like a chromatic scale. So you're not hitting those overtones, you're getting all those notes in between. The other thing you can do with your valves is just a typical valve trill. So you got your lips and you got your valves, and that's how you typically change notes. But this is not actually how the French horns were originally designed. Now, a lot of people ask me, why Ethan, are you keeping your hand inside the bell? This is the bell right here. You don't see that with trumpets. You don't see them, putting their hands in the bells like that. You don't see that with tubas. You don't see that with any other kind of brass instrument. The reason for this, the reason I keep my hand in here, is actually, it's based upon sort of the oldest origins of the present day French horn. Originally, French horns did not have any valves whatsoever. They were played purely by adjusting your hand. So first I'm going to play a F scale using my valves, and then I'm going to play it by adjusting my hand. And now I'm going to adjust my hand. So you actually are able to adjust the pitch of the French horn by stopping up the air or freeing up the air. Now, obviously, this is not designed. This is not designed for this kind of thing. This is a valve horn. I've only received a couple of lessons on actually playing a hand horn, but that is originally how these horns are meant to be played. And actually, plenty of people still specialize in this kind of thing. Now, you were probably able to tell that certain notes sounded a little bit differently when I was, using my hand to stop up the air to adjust the note. This change is what we would call a change in timbre. And what I was doing, technically speaking, is that I was actually stopping my horn. That's the terminology we use. You stop it. Not to be confused with muting it, where you put a cone in to stop up the air. Stopping up the horn is when you actually seal off the air. Now, like I said, this is not a hand horn. It's not designed for that kind of thing. But even with valve horns, we do plenty of stopping. Not to change notes, but rather to change the timbre, or to, just kind of play around with the sound a little bit. And it can be done for all kinds of different purposes. It can be done for comedy. Alright, that's a kind of a stock sound that we sometimes hear. It can also be done for something a little more eerie. Right, so this is sort of the most unique, most kind of niche part of this instrument. Now, I've kind of talked to you now about just kind of the general way this instrument works, and The French horn is indeed, possibly one of the most versatile instruments that you'll have in an orchestra. There are all kinds of different sounds that it can produce. It can produce sounds in all kinds of different ways. You can play in all kinds of different circumstances. Depending on how long your concert is, you can select methods of changing notes that don't cost as much energy. It's just so modular in the way it's able to produce music. And because of that, you'll have French horns playing in bands, but you'll also have French horns playing in brass bands, but you'll also have them playing in like woodwind quintets, because you can get that quieter, softer sound when you stop up your horn. You also have them doing these horn calls, which is sort of what they're designed for. And oftentimes in a horn call, a very frequent phenomenon is you'll stop up your horn at certain points to sort of produce an interesting kind of echo effect. And we get a really good example of this in Wagner's Siegfried horn call. So here's what it sounds like open. And then we stop it and it gets a little quieter and mysterious. Versatility there. Now, horn calls themselves, in sort of a larger orchestral sense, are often used, in my experience, to mark transitions or to mark a reprise from the chaos of a particularly intense musical moment. This is true in, let's say, the Dance Infernale of the Firebird Suite. Now, of course, I'm not a full orchestra. I can't play that for you. But what I can say is that there's sort of a beautiful horn solo that marks kind of an important transition between different movements. Now, this is even true, though, in horn solos, where horns are just kind of doing all the work, or rather horn concertos, I misspoke, my apologies, where the horns are just doing all the work. You can have, a particularly intense musical moment followed up by a horn call, which is, you're going to be doing a whole lot with the different, oftentimes with your bell, or a whole lot with your valves, or you just might be sort of freeing yourself up from the tempo a little bit. So I'm going to actually play a little something for you. And notice when I get to the horn call, which is going to be kind of free of any kind of tempo or rhythm, there's going to be a definite change in feeling. It should feel like a reprise. It should feel like an intense moment of clarity in the midst of chaos. So here's just the first part. This is not the horn call. Tonight. I hope you enjoyed this short little presentation, and I think Allegra's next. Thank you all. Thank you all so much.
Hello, everybody. Nice to see all of you tonight. Thank you so much. Ethan just gave you a lot of interesting information about French horns. I learned a couple of things, and I've been hearing him play the French horn for 11 years. So hopefully I can do something as well and teach you all about the violin. So the violin as an instrument has a really long history. The first bowed instruments in the world probably came from Inner Mongolia, or what is today Mongolia. And then eventually they made their way to the Byzantine Empire, and from there, slowly but surely, to Italy. And the modern-ish version of the violin came to this world in around the 16th to 17th century, so 1500s, 1600s, around about there. It looked a little bit different than it does now, and I will tell you a little bit more about that as the program goes on. Now, I myself have a much shorter history with the violin. I started playing when I was either 5 or 6, long enough ago that I do not remember how old I was when I started playing. 5. So mom remembers. So when I was first starting out, I did not get a full-size violin because I had tiny little hands, and so instead I played with a box violin because I learned via something called the Suzuki method, which to my knowledge is the predominant method of teaching kids several instruments, but mostly the violin. And I had a little cardboard violin that made no sound, and then eventually I got a little violin, and then a little bigger, until eventually I got to the full-size violin, like I have today. Now, I started out by learning how to play the twinkles, and I would go like... And so that's how I started learning, and then eventually from there I went on and on. There are 10 Suzuki books. I made it through 4, and what I would do, Mom and I would sit by the piano an hour every night. She would play and I would play after her, and that's how I learned for years and years. Eventually I learned how to read sheet music, but I started out learning by ear only. So now I'm going to play a few things for you, and I'm going to tell you about them. I'm going to start with Vivaldi's Spring. Now, Antonio Vivaldi is one of the first composers, I think the first composer in the Western classical canon, whom we still really have today. He was born in the late 17th century and died in 1741, I want to say. So he lived a long time ago. He primarily composed for the ospedales in Venice, Italy. And those were places that little girls were dropped off. Either they were orphaned or they were illegitimate children of noblemen, or the bottom line is they didn't have families who could take care of them. So instead they grew up in the care of nuns, and they were given lessons in various things. Some of them were given lessons in music, and Vivaldi was their teacher. He wrote a lot of music for them, including this, which is Vivaldi's Spring. played by a little girl in an orphanage in Venice for almost 400 years ago. Now, the interesting thing about Vivaldi, even though it's a very recognizable piece, Spring these days, his music wasn't known for a long time. He kind of fell out of common performance for a very long time until the early 20th century, and then he was rediscovered and treated as the master that he is. So now that was performed in the Baroque era, which was when the violin was originally come up with. Now it looked a little different in those days than it does now. You can see it's nice big instrument. I've got a bow and everything. There's a lot of wood here, and there's a frog at the end. But you might be wondering, why is this thing called a bow? It looks like just a straight piece of wood. In the Baroque era, it would have been curved like an actual bow and arrow. And instead of holding it down here, like I do, Baroque musicians would hold it up here. Now, I'm just going to play a little bit to show you how it would have sounded a little bit different. Now, there's a lot less bow to work with because it's just really awkward to play down here if you've got your hand up here. Baroque instruments would have sounded a lot quieter. Another thing that was different is that a Baroque bridge, which is this piece right here, kind of looks like a bridge, would have been a lot flatter. So it was a lot easier for Baroque musicians to play double stops like this. Or even more notes. It's a lot harder for me, and I can't even play 3 notes at once. That makes the work of the next composer, Johann Sebastian Bach, that I'm going to play for you, a lot harder to play on a modern instrument. Now, of course, it's still playable. Bach is one of the most played classical composers, but some of his works, especially double stop heavy works, are a little bit harder. I've played Bach a lot at church when I've been asked to play, usually Air on a G string or Jesu, Joy of Man's Desiring. Bach was a very religious composer. He did a lot of music for church, and he even stated that music was his way of feeling close to God. But he wrote some secular music too, and the piece I'm about to play is a secular piece of music. It is a jig in C major. It would have been used as dance music in the 18th centuries. And there's going to be a lot of double stops in it, which is why I showed you at the beginning.
What is a double stop?
A double stop is when I play, sorry I didn't explain, is when I play 2 notes at once, like this.
2 strings?
2 strings at once. So I'm going to play a jig in C major that has a lot of double stops. And here we go. before, and that was actually the first time I've ever played it, so pardon the mistakes. I've never played it for other people before. This was written originally for cello, and I transposed it for a violin. I was unable to find anything in the same key for violin. I was unable to find any sheet music, so I wrote that down myself. So as I said, that used a lot of double stops, which is one of the many special techniques that a violin can use. In the same way that Ethan showed you the way that French horns can play several different notes, I'm going to show you now a couple of techniques that violinists really use. As I said, I already demonstrated the double stops, so now I'm about to demonstrate one of the most critical techniques for a violinist, vibrato. So first I'm going to play a note without some vibrato, just to give you some contrast. Now I'm going to play the exact same note with a little bit of vibrato. So it can add a little bit of emotional resonance when done properly. When done wrong, it can make things sound a little bit too melodramatic. It can get the pitch off a little bit, all sorts of things. So one of the things worth considering as a violinist as you're playing on is how much vibrato are you going to add? What parts do you want to really emphasize and make sweet and emotional? And that's when you want to use a little bit of vibrato. Another thing that a violinist can use, as you can see, I mostly use the bow because it's a bowed instrument. I can also pluck it like a guitar, and that is called pizzicato. So that's not used as often, but there are some pieces written entirely in pizzicato. I just played you a very short excerpt from one of those, a movement from a symphony by Benjamin Britten, appropriately titled Playful Pizzicato. There's one more technique that I'm going to show, a very special technique called harmonics. So normally, when I play my third finger, this one right here, I put it on the A string and it makes this sound. Now that's a D natural. Now if I play it very specifically and if my intonation is just right, it'll sound like this. Now that's a lot higher, and that I can get by just gently lowering it just slightly onto the string. That's a very special effect sound that I use for certain pieces. There's a piece called Scheherazade, and in the final movement of this piece, written by Nikolai Rimsky-Korsakov, he tells the story of, well, several different stories of the Arabian Nights, and the last story that he tells is of Sinbad, and Sinbad the sailor eventually wrecks his ship on a rock, and so I use a lot of harmonics in the last movement to signal the wind whistling through the timbers and through the sails as if to say that there's danger coming. So as I've been able to show, hopefully, the violin is a super versatile instrument. You can get a lot of sounds, you can play a lot of different kinds of music on it. It's just a really it can do a lot. Now, one of the things is that it is not just limited to Western classical music. Now, Western classical music usually limits itself based on absolute pitch. As you know, there's the piano, and that is a well-tempered instrument. It is entirely tuned very carefully. Or there's a guitar where when it's tuned, no matter where you put your fingers on the frets, it will always sound exactly the same. Intonation doesn't really matter. Now for an instrument like the violin, as you can see, there are no frets. So if I put my finger down wrong, it will not sound like the note that I was going for. And so in Western classical music, it means you need to be really careful. But in other musical traditions, it means that you can do a lot more. One of those traditions is the Middle Eastern musical tradition. In that tradition, there are obviously tones. There's the scale. I'll just play a scale real quick. And then in Middle Eastern music, there are are microtones, so slightly different. So like that. And there have been whole conferences undertaken by Middle Eastern music masters trying to figure out, so how close can you cut it? What exactly is each microtone? They've always come away inconclusive, and the bottom line is you have a lot more freedom, and a violin, which allows you to do things like that, is a perfect addition to Middle Eastern music. Now, before going to college, I was entirely educated in the Western canon. And then when I got to Bowdoin College, I started with a Middle Eastern ensemble. And we played music, everything from movie songs, from Egyptian movies from the 50s, to ancient court music used in the Ottoman Empire. And that is a whole different tradition. We play things completely differently. There's a lot of different rhythmic options, and it's very different than a Western classical orchestra. I'm going to play two pieces for you real quick right now from the Middle Eastern tradition. The first one is a dance. It's called Nihavend Zebek, and it's done in a line, so I'm going to play. Different than the pieces that I was just playing beforehand. You use a different scale and a different rhythm, and when it's played, we all play the same thing at once and then kind of bat it around. Maybe somebody will improvise on top of it as we would play it in an ensemble. Maybe somebody would add harmonics, but it's very different. Now the next piece I'm going to play is also from the Middle Eastern tradition. This is a folk song from the Caucasus Mountains. It's called Zaytun, also known as olive in English. So here goes. Ensemble, then it would go into the drum section would get going, and then we would play it much faster, and we would play it several times around. But those are two pieces from the Middle Eastern ensemble. Now, for my last bit, the violin is pretty much omnipresent. You hear it in rock and roll, you hear it in classical music, Middle Eastern music, and pop music. And this is, for my last song, a little bit of a pop standard. It's called Fly Me to the Moon. And now we're going to go into the other room.
No, we'll put
Oh,
time
we're
here.
gonna quit quick time here so that we can answer some questions. So just give us a couple of seconds to set this up.
All right. And
All
it should
right,
be back
we
to
are
normal.
unmuted. I'm gonna pull out the headphones so that we can hear everybody.
We back to normal?
Are we back to normal?
Well, you guys blow me away. What great talent. Let's give them a big round of applause. Wow. Amazing.
I'm gonna go in the other room.
I'll see if I can fix this.
It's okay. Go in the other room. It's all right, sweetie pie.
Hello.
So I have a question for Ethan. Is Ethan still there?
Yes, I'm still here.
I think I heard Allegra say she's been playing since age 5, and you said you've been playing for 11 years, right?
Yeah, that's right. So I played. I started at. Well, I was three when I started playing violin. Was doing it.
So,
And then a couple years later, it was good. You know, it really set me up. But it wasn't really my intent. And then, like, you know, at the 5th grade, I discovered like that for the past.
don't be too proud when I ask you this. I'm interested in myself. When did both of you start to achieve that feeling that you were good and you sounded good at what you were doing? Once you got through all the scratchy stuff of learning the instrument, what would you, when did that happen for each one of you?
It hasn't happened yet.
Same.
So I mean,
It's a
we're
dangerous
always
question.
working towards it, and we're always working towards sounding better. And it's always every time I perform, I'm always like, oh man, I always heard this and that, and oh boy, how can I do it? But I guess if you really had to ask when I felt like I was actually a musician, there was a moment. I was playing the Firebird Suite in the 7th grade, and I realized I could play it, and I could read the sheet music, and I was playing, and it just made me realize that I can really play this instrument. I really got it.
How about you, Ethan?
I guess also playing the Firebird. You know, the reason I sort of stuck with the French horn, I think, is because I mentioned this briefly when I was talking about sort of clarity and chaos. There's this one solo in the Firebird that sort of, like I said, it kind of marks a transition. And you know, I've always really loved that piece of music even before I'd started playing the horn. And you know, I'm not really sure if it was while I was playing it that I started thinking I was sounding good, or when I was practicing it. Because whenever I'm actually playing something, I'm just like, oh, don't mess up, don't mess up. But I'd say that the sort of the period that I was preparing for and executing that particular solo for the first time, which was, I think it was like junior year, was sort of a time where I felt the most connected to my instrument. And then, you know, when I actually played again in my junior year of college, which is the last time I played with my orchestra before the pandemic hit, which is, I think, one of the best concerts I was ever had the opportunity to be a part of. That was another instance that I felt really, you know, connected. But I mean, like Allegra said, you know, it's an ongoing process. You know, we're always working towards this ideal, and then every time we get a little bit closer, we push it just a little bit higher. And you know, our teachers do the same, say, yeah, that was great, but this and that, and this and that, and this and that. So you know, but there have been certain moments, I'd say, that I felt very connected.
Well, I'm going to make a confession to you. When I do a self-diagnosis of myself, I know I have at least a ting, if not a large amount, of obsessive compulsive disorder. And I wonder, I for one believe that my musical background has contributed to that because you're always, you keep going back to make it perfect, and I see that taking a shape in other patterns. You know, I can't leave the church until I have everything done. I can't leave school work in the day until I know I don't have to I have everything done before I come back to start a clean slate. Has that been your experience as well, or is that just a David Gus kind of thing.
No, that makes sense. I mean, I guess listening to for music in particular, like it just gets you thinking, oh man, did I do that right? Did I do that right? I need to make sure again. I need to check again. I need to check for the 50th time on my work schedule to make sure that I'm not missing anything.
Right.
So yeah.
Yeah, it's the same here. I know this is certainly true with the horn. There's kind of actually a story to this. So I one time played a concert. I thought it went terribly. And I was talking to my horn teacher at the time, Mr. Perry, and he gives like a compliment once in a million years. He's that kind of a guy. But what he did is he actually took this little tuning fork, and he actually pressed it to my jaw. This is going somewhere. Don't worry. And I was actually able to hear it in my ear, right? And what he told me is, whenever you play an instrument, you are going to sound totally different to yourself. Basically, the people listening to you are going to hear something completely different. And that's good in that you are much more likely to pick up on any little mistakes or errors that you make in terms of what your sound is doing. So of course, whenever I play, I'll say to myself after popping a note, I'll be like, oh, I popped that note, or oh, that was, that pitch like wavered, and it sounds actually, you can actually really hear it when this thing is pressed into your face. You can really pick that up. But then, if I ask somebody else, they say, oh, I didn't notice that. But what other people will notice probably more than you is the player, is maybe how your tempo deviates. In your head, something might sound like it's in time, but when you're actually playing it, of course, it's not. And that's something that, of course, I've had to learn to be more mindful of, in the past. That's why I like playing cadenzas and horn calls, because you don't really have to worry about thinking in time too much.
I want to know, Ethan, I know obviously now it's a weird time with the pandemic. Do you both want to continue a career in music as far as like being in an orchestra, or do you see yourself teaching music, or what do you both see as far as music is concerned for how you're going to want to continue it?
I'm always going to play violin. I'm always going to have that with me. I mean, I could put it down for a few months and pick it up again, and I've done that before, and it's always just right there. I hope once the pandemic ends, for me in particular, I'm probably going to join a community orchestra here in Miami or wherever I may end up, and I'm going to keep that with me. I don't know if I would specifically give lessons, but if somebody were to ask me, I might try.
Yeah, I mean, I give lessons when I'm asked to, not professionally. I'm not a professional horn player, so I give them for free, which is, I guess, an advantage for anybody who would be paying for them. And of course, I enjoy giving lessons thoroughly. I mean, I love talking about the horn, and it's a very interesting instrument. But in terms of an actual career in music, I mean, career is somewhat up in the air for me right now. I am here going into my spring semester, but I'm kind of still figuring out what I'm doing. But like Allegra, I definitely want to be part of community orchestras at the very least. I definitely want to try to get to the habit of practicing more often and more consistently, so I can just kind of maintain my skill wherever I need to call upon it. But I mean, like Allegra said, that music is going to be part of our lives,
Forever, yeah.
And
well, it seems to be a part of your all of your lives, including
yeah.
Oh yeah.
You're all very extremely talented, so it's really nice to see that.
Thank you. And I mean, yeah, I guess whatever opportunity would present itself, we'd take it. In terms of,
I don't have a question, but I have one of my corny jokes. The hills are alive. The hills are alive with the sound of music.
yes.
What can I say? Just not really. Just bringing joy and happiness to people through music is such an amazing thing, and for you to have that gift, it's pretty cool. So, thank you for sharing it.
Thank you. This has given me a chance. It's hard for me to get practicing when I don't have anything specific to practice for, and this gave me an opportunity. This gave me something to practice for. So I'm very grateful.
We're really happy to have you tonight. How has has your music been therapeutic wise for you during the pandemic for your music, or?
Yeah, I think so. I haven't been playing as much. Sometimes you need to be in the right mindset, and I've been feeling so dark and so frightened about things that I haven't always even been able to pick up the instrument, because sometimes it's hard to get even thinking about that. You need to be in the right headspace. I spoke to my former Ethan's current and my former college conductor about this, and we've spoken a bit about just that sometimes it can be hard. But yeah, I mean, just having music is very therapeutic. Just listening to it can be really helpful, and kind of imagining playing along and like, oh, how would I play this if I heard?
Yeah, as you can see, dogs are pretty therapeutic too.
Do the animals enjoy the music?
They seem it kind of depends. I mean, I'm pretty sure, I mean, my whole life that I've been playing, we've had at least 2 animals, usually more, in the house. As many for a while we had as many. I mean, I think they at least can appreciate it. I've had my cat in particular will sit and watch me practice. Really? And just like sit. Yeah, Coco really? Does. Yeah, Coco.
I have to say, Ethan gives lessons to
a scary cat.
No. Is she, how old is she? 5th grade?
No, not anymore. He's like 7th grade. 7th grade.
Anyway, it's been really interesting to sit and listen to him giving lessons to this child who's in Maine. He's given her lessons for the last couple of years, and I guess it's continuing.
On and off. Yeah.
The energy that she brings to it and that he brings, I think it's remarkable that over the internet, this connection can be made. And I'm kind of in awe, I guess, of young people, how adaptable they are. I'm not saying it's not a struggle for them this time, but they just seem to just kind of go with the flow and enjoy this and take out of this what they can. And I'm really in awe of them and how they're handling this, I guess.
Yeah, and I'd say, I guess, like I said, you don't actually necessarily even have to be playing it in order to get something out of it. I will say that this particular time has sort of forced, both musicians and people who enjoy music, people who consume music, to really kind of push sort of the boundaries of how they experience or produce music.
Mm-hmm.
And I actually think that's a good thing to some degree. This past semester I kept taking lessons, but virtually, and so of course I had to be practicing, and my horn teacher was actually paying very close attention, specifically to this, he had me create this exercise routine to stay in shape, and actually building that up probably wouldn't have been as important in a normal time, but it has been now, and that's given me like a whole new sort of perspective on horn playing. Like so much of the so many things that I played for you tonight, like the lip trill and the finger trill, and even the stopped horn, are actually things that I have only just started to kind of pick up, because I haven't really had to worry about practicing repertoire for concerts or or solos. I had one solo that I had to do, and that was basically it. So there have been ups and there have been downs. There definitely actually have been some opportunities that sort of the general sort of quarantine setting has presented to musicians and people who consume music.
Yeah, Ethan, when you were, no pun intended, but when you made that little laugh about the dogs and the animals, felt like I struck a chord. No pun intended. But real quickly before we go, I do want to tell you, I congratulations on your considering making music your minor. I started out as a music major when I was an undergrad, and you know, I thought I was pretty damn good when I was going and playing for the high school chorus. But then when they said I had to do a recital to audition to get into the music department, oh my gosh, you go and you start realizing there are hundreds of other people that are just as good as you and not better. And it's like, so don't give up. Don't give up, because you're both very, very talented. And we certainly at St. Mark's appreciate your contribution to our music program. Would I don't mean to talk so much. Anybody else want to say anything before we close?
I have a comment and a question. I just want to say I really appreciate the fact that you kind of gave us a little inroad into your mind and your thinking as you're creating the music and playing it and learning it. I've never seen that before. You know, when you hear interviews with musicians, they don't really open themselves up like you have, and so I really appreciate that because it was very interesting and intriguing. And my question is, did you all ever play the violin together since you both started out with the violin? Did you ever like play a duet? I know you've done a duet with the French horn and the violin because you did that at church, but did you ever do two violins? Just curious.
I mean, we played Twinkle Twinkle Little Star at the same time together.
I don't really remember.
That's about as far as we got. We were both at the time. We were both like playing two strings and like three fingers. So it's been a long time.
I have very cute videos.
Right, you do.
I was 3 and Allegra was 5. It was cute.
I was a glorified toddler, so I don't
He was
really
really
have
little.
any recollection.
Oh, we'd love to see them.
It's adorable.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much. It was a glorious evening. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, you know, this pandemic has really done quite, has been quite impactful to musicians in general, especially given the fact that everybody has to wear a mask and what can you do musically and what you can't. But you brought out a beautiful artistic part of the instruments, the personal part Charlene was mentioning, and the psychological therapeutic part. I mean, and what a beautiful family you all are, blessed by music and musicians, and of course what you do for all of us. So thank you everybody for tuning in tonight. Let's give the Hills another big round of applause. God bless each one of you. I have at least eight council people on Zoom tonight. So remember, everybody along with church council, we need you at the annual meeting this week. Looking forward to that. It's going to be abbreviated worship. The theme for the worship this week is Welcome a Stranger, certainly an appropriate theme as we think about social justice and growing our church and mission development. Looking forward to seeing all of you on Sunday. God bless each and every one of you. Let's hear it again for the Hills. Yay!
Yay! Yay! Bravo! Bravo!
Everybody, good night.
Good night.
Good night.
Bless.
Night.
Goodbye.